Welcome to the Performance Wellbeing Podcast. I'm Dawn Sanders, co-founder and director of WinWell, and have been a performance wellbeing coach in elite sport and business for over 20 years. I'm keen to explore what it means to win well, and in this series of podcasts, we dive deep into the lives of the people who are trying to do just that, in high-performance, high-pressure environments, balancing the demands of success with self-care. I hope through these stories we can learn together and think about how we can win well at work and in life. In this episode, I am delighted to be joined by Jen Coe, Performance Wellbeing Lead for the Barclays Women's Super League and Championship. Jen shares with us how holistic care, supporting the person behind the performer, and creating intentional performance wellbeing strategies are shaping the landscape of women's football. She unpacks what it takes to build cultures where psychological safety, human connection, and sustainable well-being are not just ideals, but foundational pillars of success. We'll discuss how self-care shows up in small, consistent actions and what it means to prioritise well-being in leadership, culture, and strategies. So, whatever culture, team, or environment you're looking to enhance, this conversation will challenge you to rethink what it means to succeed both on and off the pitch. Now, let's get started. Hi, Jen. Thank you so much for being my guest today. Having spoken to you over recent weeks and months, I know how passionate you are about performance well-being and making sure within women's football it's an integral part of everything that you do. So I'm hugely grateful to have you with me today.
Oh, I'm delighted to be asked, Dawn. Thanks. And I did, when you asked me to record, I said, oh gosh, we're probably going to need a day knowing us in the conversation. How will we limit what we're going to talk about? So I'm really looking forward to a good conversation.
I'm really looking forward to hearing what you share with us, Jen, and having that mutual respect for what you do. I think will be amazing for everyone to hear the things that you've got to share today. So thank you. Jen, I'm firstly asking perhaps all of the guests to describe who they are, but not just what they do for a living. So if you could describe your whole self, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, sure. The opening question on like a podcast or even, the elevator pitch or the interactions, I'm always mindful of I suppose it's me as a person then, what do they want to hear? What's useful? What's the hook that somebody might say, there's a relatable thing, I'll stay listening? Or is it, is it the title of the work? Is it the industry? So I really like the whole self or the whole person angle on this. And sometimes I think that gets lost. Even I think about when I meet people, what are they seeing? If this is like impression management, are they hearing my accent? Are they seeing that I'm a female? Or do they know something they've read that they want to hook onto that and get more that's relatable for them or relevant for them at that time? So the many hats that I wear would be, I'm a wife to an incredible woman. We got married during COVID, actually, really interesting time in London to be able to drive around in a cab and take all these incredible photos. But yeah, incredible woman. A recent mother, still getting my head around that piece. He's 7 weeks old, little Freddie. And there's a whole heap of sports stuff. So I'm a former international athlete and really deeply passionate at my core about creating meaningful connections. I'm a very relational person in all that I do. So beyond my career, I value integrity and creativity, professionalism. And that's a more new kind of a newer realization for me around loving that standard and the next level of it and being professional and how we interact and do our work. Anyway, for later in the conversation. But I do also enjoy moments of simplicity. So we moved and bought a house, bought somewhere to live in the middle of Epping Forest. And that contrast to the busy city life and having that space and a walk in the forest with, no technology and just the sounds around you and nature, or even just a simple kind of interaction over a cup of coffee that doesn't have layers and layers of an agenda. So spending time with family, exploring nature, advocating for women in sport. It's definitely have different titles and it's been in different contexts, but it's a thread for as long as I can remember of fighting the corner of a woman in sport, working in sport, leaving the ladder down for others. So the personal experiences, I guess, that I've had over the years have definitely shaped this belief of finding a balance of ambition and driving forward and that well-being piece. And and also thriving for the what's next and the curiosity of what one can achieve. So yeah.
So areas around sort of connection, your athlete journey, looking for simplicity, striving for what's right for female athletes in sport. You know, you could have chosen any role in sport or outside of sport, Jen, with that. So what drove you to do the role you're doing now?
You know, it's really interesting because I do tap in with motivation, my own motivations and motives over the years to see like, what do I really enjoy doing? What do I need to do? You know, where is that balance? And I think what drives me is a belief that I perform best when I feel valued as a person. And I've definitely worked across so many different industries, like be it journalism, or I was a radio presenter back in the day. I've had a lifeguard, you know, all a list of different things. And it was the jobs that created positive memories, feeling valued, not feeling micromanaged or like they were squeezing the lemon, for that phrase. As someone who's been on kind of both sides of the performance spectrum, in a coach and athlete, coach developer psychology, I just know it's a vital part to integrate the well-being piece into performance. And I probably wouldn't have labelled it that, Dawn, over the years. I would have just had an awareness that there's an imbalance here, or not even looking through a gendered lens. It was just that I wasn't at my best, and why wasn't I? And people were pulling me to perform and demand more of, and I was giving it. And I grew up thinking grafting is the best way and the only way. So just keep going. So I now I'm driven by creating environments that help individuals thrive holistically. And I hate the word legacy, so it's not this big picture of a legacy, but just to leave care patterns and care memories in the impact of people that I work with.
Yeah, I love that. Like you feeling valued, you feeling like you're having a positive impact, but seeing care present and being an integral part sounds like something that hugely drives you.
Yeah, it does, definitely. And there's something in the consistency of it. So you're not doing this like, you know, ad hoc or one hit wonder piece of care, that it's like consistent. It's the salutations in an email. There's the check in with people when it's not an agendaed conversation. There's loads of different examples of just the care in a person and the memories that you create with them that go far beyond moments of work in an email, you know?
Yeah, that sustainable bit, isn't it? That's the legacy bit,
sustainable.
a little bit more that you speak of. It seems a big word, doesn't it? Sort of legacy, when you think about it, but knowing that they're integral parts of conversations, or how we communicate, or how we connect with people or speak with people, or how you help them feel valued, those bits are hugely important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And during that time, Jen, you know, going globally and seeing other sports and seeing the huge amount of research and insight you've gathered to kind of find out what good or best practice might look like in this space, where did that take you?
Yeah, I think there's something, there's definitely like golden threads or key threads in the different roles that I've had over the years, like even being an analyst and experiencing, you know, life through that lens with big teams and big budgets, and then smaller teams and one-to-one individual conversations. There was always a thread of who are you as a person and what do you need and what are you going through, and then leaning more towards the kind of psych stuff, then what are the psychological demands of that space that you're in, or the needs. And even if it was life, if the demands were life, then how could we get the best out of a person, or empower them to get the best out of themselves, and know what the triggers were, be more self-aware, to maybe have a co-created journey, so it wasn't the power dynamic. And I think there's something around this performance wellbeing title that felt just really right. It felt the right place at the right time. It's not that, you know, it hasn't appeared in different spaces, but there was already something in the football space that was working in a way, but not really helping us do this, maximize performance and feel good and function well. So there's something about aligning the excellence within the whole person. And then that intersection of achieving your best while staying mentally, emotionally, physically healthy, I suppose. Yeah. As we know, the self-help industry is massive. So I think with the, access to TikTok videos and quick bite-sized things of people, it's bite-size of education that they might get through different channels. It's very easy for messages to be diluted and quality to drift and ambiguity to come into people's space. So I think it means this thread over the years that I've gathered and built on, it means that you're creating systems and processes which sound really clinical and rigid, but where athletes and staff can feel supported. So that was the coach development route that I went down, because I realized I can do all the work with the athletes and be player facing as much as possible. But if the staff aren't looking after themselves, if they don't have the right language, if they don't understand the needs and what they say and how that can ripple into players, then we're kind of at nothing. It's one step forward, two steps back. So, I think there's something around that. It's like there's a non-negotiable pillar of well-being that needs to be at the core of every other piece of the strategy that people want to in all high performance environments.
So it's not just sort of delivery to the players, to the athletes. It's educating, informing, supporting, coaching, development, coaching staff, support staff. It's the wider conversation that forms policies and strategies to kind of enable it to be delivered on the ground to the people to show you care.
That's it, Dawn, absolutely. And I think one of the bugbears, and I'm not going to get in a soapbox here, but one of the bugbears, and you've probably seen this, is that there's a whole heap of stuff out there that says look after yourself. So there's 5 ways to well-being, 50 ways to this, 30 ways to that. And definitely in previous roles, I have been the person who says to the individual coach or the athlete, like, have you thought about this, this and this? And there was a moment where I was on a call and I was having a conversation. I think it was on a webinar. I was facilitating a conversation, and it was like one of these light bulb moments. I was the one saying, have a walk in nature, have a bath, have this. And I was like, hang on a minute. I don't like that. They stress me out. My mind is going too fast. I can't slow down. Now that in itself is an indicator of maybe more work needing to be done. But I was like, well, what works for a different person, each to their own, on how they want to look after their well-being. But there's no point in me doing something for my own well-being and going back into a toxic environment. So it's the responsibility of the organisation, the club, the system to kind of go, hey, let's have a little sense check here on where we're at and engage on what our role model behaviours are looking like. And, is banter kind of helpful or hindering something here when I say, oh, you're going to work at home today for a half day, are you? You're on a half day. Like, why is that person working from home? How much clarity do I have? Not saying you can't have fun, but how environments can be kind of constrained and hampered and not really supportive of people's well-being if there's jibes about somebody trying to find a balance, finding the courage to have a balance that works for them. That was around the house on that one, but there's definitely something about the responsibility of the organisation or a group of people and then the individual. It doesn't solely fall on one shoulder.
Because as well intended as advice is around some of those wellbeing activities, everyone, like you say, is so different, and that feels a little more transactional for me. Whereas transformational coaching around wellbeing is, like you say, helping people understand themselves. How does this work within a system or a culture or an environment to enable people to thrive and them to be performing well as human beings as well as elite performers.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And the game, from a women's football perspective, the game is just exploding. Like, it's continuing to grow. It's exciting. There's, so many people interested in being involved. The players are, their aspirations are breaking ceilings, not just within sports, transcending sport. It's society and gender equity shifts and language is changing. And it's just incredible. But we've all got to move with it, and we've got to keep understanding what this moving landscape looks like, and what the needs and demands are of everybody inside that space. So they're on a journey together, and it isn't just the responsibility of one person who has a title or the individual athlete to say, I need help in this. And then when they do ask for that there's not a stigma around it.
Yeah. And from seeing that growth and seeing that development within the game and understanding that whole person and the need to develop and support them, what have you seen have been some of the biggest wellbeing needs, Jen, of the female players that you've been supporting and understanding?
Yeah, good question. I think when we talk about the environment, the need, and a term that is familiar with a lot of people, maybe not in the nuances and granular detail of what it looks like in real life, but it's this safety piece. The needs are, one of the biggest needs is for a player to feel like they have a voice, they're being heard, they're being seen, and they can ask questions and challenge in the environment. So there's something about this psych safety. The player needs environment to feel safe, to express themselves, to seek help, so they can thrive on the pitch, so they can do their job. I think there's something around the term, which I haven't found a better term. I've toyed with a few over the years, but this balance. So the work-life balance, or the love and loathe balance, is so important. I think balancing the demands of sport, personal commitments, family, just trying to understand, education wise and aspirations, identity. There's just so much wrapped up in this balance of, when am I a footballer, or when am I a person who likes to play football? And when am I a person who likes to go and explore a city, have a holiday, have a family, connect with others, write a book, start a business? And that balance of, when am I in work, even if I absolutely love, and I'm so privileged and grateful to be working in football, a sport I love, where's the balance without it tipping over? So having people that support this balance and this space and help people grow and develop self-awareness and emotional intelligence in the space for staff and players, I think could be really helpful. Then the other need, which I think we're doing a really great job at the moment in the kind of women's professional leagues, is the female athlete health. So the need was that we need to understand more about our bodies. And like, I'm learning as well, which is kind of a little bit embarrassing to say as a 40-year-old, like what I didn't know about my body 2 years ago that I know now, and the changes that might come. And, even my wife having a baby, all the stuff that might happen during that period. So there's understanding, all the components, which, some topics are more familiar around menstrual health. And then there's other areas that maybe people weren't as familiar with, that when we did this big State of the Nation and looked at the landscape, we were able to add education in there. But there's a growing need for everyone to understand, and that you're working in women's sport, there's an incredible amount of information around female health. And another area then, the final area I think is really big, is as the game grows, this career and financial piece, that's a massive piece. So we know the psychological demands are growing. We know the physical female athlete health piece is there, the balance around social and emotional, but the career and financial is a real interesting one, because we've got quite a spectrum. We've got players at one end who are in 6-figure salaries. They're having the time of their life. They're living the best life. Their career is growing. There's a growing number on their head, which is a horrible way of thinking about them, being a commodity, which we've eradicated that word, hopefully. But there's a need to keep moving up that scale. And then there's other people who have 2 jobs, who maybe aren't earning as much and still trying to navigate that. So the need is to understand financial health and wealth, and then the career part of that. So that's the scoping that we've done. There's smaller micro needs within that around sexuality, neurodiversity, disordered eating, that we're all exploring. But under those bigger umbrellas, I think that's what our work is linked in with at the moment.
So areas of psychological safety, of balance. It's an interesting term, isn't it? Balance. It's like, not necessarily that will be an equilibrium on a day or a week or a month. It will shift. But how do you create the space, I guess, to be your whole self, and opportunities to connect with family and friends, or express yourself in a different way.
Yeah.
And then elements again. Sorry, carry on.
No, sorry, Don. It's just a really good point. You sparked a thought with me there. Was like, there's something about that switchboard of noticing in myself, where am I today? What am I operating? And we know analogies over the years from different models, like where is my cup, half empty or full, or how do I refuel or release the valve? Like all of these things of, what am I noticing in my body about where I'm at? And do I have the tools to alleviate? And the tools might be a person, or it might be a mantra I'm saying, or some other exercise or technique. But it's so important, isn't it, to just understand that I'm okay to operate at 60% today. I don't need to be at 100. And when I engage in a conversation, I might be able to say to them, listen, I'm at 50% mentally today. I'm exhausted. And from a psych safety perspective, the recipient of that information then doesn't go, well, you're a professional athlete. You need to be at 100, 110%. If I laughed every time I heard someone say, give me 120, sorry, what? When did 100% of you not become enough? But also, a last example, I sat in a workshop, it was probably about 10 years ago now, and it stayed with me. And this guy, I think his name was Harry Bartlett, he was an SAS leader, different up the chain title, can't remember his title. And he talked about working at 85%. Now, his industry, obviously, war and, all of that army stuff, it's different. I get that. But it did stay with me about the 85% because the wiggle room piece, he was saying, if I'm always at 90 or 100 or like to the max and something lands on my plate or we have to make a quick decision, I just don't have the capacity. And I just thought at the time for me, that was brilliant because I was in a role where I was trying to show my worth and go over the top, and I was traveling the length and breadth of the country, and I was all bells and whistles and the best version of myself all the time. And I was exhausted. And I was reading books, listening to podcasts, literature, you name it, I was doing it. And I was like, this is not sustainable, because if somebody comes in with a request or something doesn't go to plan, or I have which I had many occasions, a really deep conversation with a coach that they trusted me to have, I was then in a position with that information, but I'm already at almost capacity because I'd loaded myself up with this, multitude of other things. So yeah, there's something about the balance, but the balance knowing that whatever relationship conversation you enter into, that between you might be at 100,
It's noticing, isn't it? Noticing those things about you, even noticing, I guess you say about your female, your needs as a female athlete and your female health needs, your financial needs, your career planning needs. It's just noticing and understanding it, and where do you go with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so that's the what, Jen. And then how would you deliver against that? How do you implement some of those things into the club structure that you've been speaking about?
Yeah. What an exciting and big task. So when I came into the role that I'm in now, there was a real clear understanding from the clubs that there was a need to have somebody in a well-being, psychosocial, at the time, player care space. So that buy-in was there, but I don't know if they really understood what the term was. And there was an umbrella of maybe 10 or 8 or 9, 10 different terms and things that were falling underneath it. And that included psychology and safeguarding, as well as player care, player executive, player advisory. So it was kind of looking at what the needs were, as we've spoken about there, and the kind of filtered down needs, and then all of the environments, and then the staff, what they were equipped with, making sure the players felt heard, the staff felt heard, to then get to a place and say, well, if we want to go on a journey together, and we don't want to just come in and say, you must do this and you have to have this at this point 18 months ago. It was the education around, it's not what you'll gain from having this person or prioritising well-being, it's what you're missing out on. And that was the story. It was telling a story of 40 different nationalities playing in the league, all the different cultures and microcultures that are existing, the transition in the life cycle of the player while they're at the club, and the transition out to various locations or to injury or another club, of how can I help you understand that if we integrate somebody who's doing this triage and having this rich conversation, then it's giving more time back to the physios, the medical people, the technical team who are having these conversations that are maybe beyond their remit, and stretching them. And it's having some processes in place to say, oh, I've had a great conversation with Jen or Dawn today. They did talk about this, and I'm not sure I'm best placed to extend that. And previously, maybe they felt they had no one to turn to. So I think integration, clarity on what it is, integration into like the best systems have well-being embedded in them. And it's a daily connection with it that links to performance, because we know they're inextricably linked. Leadership matters. So I spoke early on about role models. I think there's a financial investment. There's a language and behavior. There's a there's progress happening when leaders genuinely value this. And I've seen it, as you probably have, in different organizations. I see it in different clubs. In the Women's Super League and the Women's Championship, they've invested in full-time staff in performance well-being, and they're integrated in a team with a psychologist or with the multidisciplinary team. And now they're adding richness to those kind of objective, kind of quantitative measures that maybe the on-pitch staff were collecting and observing. And they're saying, well, holistically, have we thought about the whole person? And they might be going through this, and, you know, they've just come here, and loneliness is a factor. And, you know, so just a leadership, I suppose, in the individual and in an authentic way, but from a hierarchy way, who's at the top of the chain making the decisions. And I think I mentioned cultures. I think for this to work, there's an awareness of the importance of like cultural competence and cultural adaptability. So there's no one size fits all solution. What we can have is quality assurance at a minimum standard. So, for example, in the women's pro game, the performance well-being role, the people within that can come from any different avenue. There's a diversity of thought that the richness of that person would bring to the table. So they might come from social care, they might come from education, they might have transitioned from a player and done some courses, so they're aware of the sensitivity of the different hat they might wear from a player to a staff member. So there's something about understanding if some athlete, individual player travels from Japan and has played in 5, 6, 8, 10 in some cases clubs, what kind of person are we getting here? It's not just someone who fits that space and fits that role, but we've got to nourish that human being. And what are their needs? And, you know, is this the 8th club in 10 years? And where are your family and other half? And who's your social circle? So I think just building this performance well-being space requires listening, learning and evolving, you know, constantly.
Yeah. And that buy-in, as you say, from within the culture, from leadership, to embed it, to enable people to understand what their role is within that community as well.
Yeah.
And you could have called it any name. You know, there's many versions and names of this. I think, you know, within the UK Sports Institute, it's performance lifestyle. I've obviously heard player care, player development managers. What led you towards sort of performance well-being?
Yeah, so I knew well-being was something that we were going to focus on. I knew well-being was something we were going to focus on, and I knew it was inextricably linked to performance. But I was obviously going through many, many different titles that we already had. Do we have player in there? Do we have lifestyle? Because there's already a really good foundation in what works in the kind of the Olympic pathway. But I thought it set expectations. So I think a name for me is important. And because some people have said, oh, it's just the job they do, so does that really matter? But what matters most is the person who is behind it. And the performance well-being resonated with me because it highlights the holistic nature of the role, blending human care with high performance. And I think like this particular name should reflect the commitment that we expect to see in people. So we have the performance. I expect them to be embedded in the multidisciplinary conversations, the well-being piece, that we have a framework that we can work that covers key components of the needs of the individuals. But I think above all, Dawn, this was the one that was fit for the women's game, the needs of women's professional football. We said we've got them, you know, they're playing, in some cases, they're playing a season in a week. You know, they've got so many hours on the pitch, so many hours in the gym, so many hours with different, you know, psychology, well-being or operations, the fans, media, you know, their own personal life. So there's a whole scope of things there that I thought, on the pitch, we're performing in a certain way, and off the pitch, you're performing in a certain way. So how can we connect those and make that a priority? So a long-winded way of it, but there was a whole host of research and thought that went into the iterations of that to get to there.
Yeah. And can you expand on that framework a bit more broadly, Jen? You know, what does that look like, understanding those complexities of the life of an athlete now?
Yeah, sure. So a load of different literature looked at different models around well-being, and I'd used those over the years in different ways. And the 9 pillars of well-being was one that we kind of paused on, and I knew 9 was too big. And then I thought about the different pillars and how they'd suit the needs of the women's game. And then we did a lot of research and insight gathering into the needs of the game, and then started to see some patterns and thought, well, okay, this falls in the career and financial piece at the moment. This is definitely in a mental and psychological well-being place. And so we had 4 sections that we narrowed it down to. And I mentioned early on, we've got a growing inclusivity, I suppose. We've got a growing diverse range of players coming for 40 different nations, and then we've got staff coming equally eager to get into the women's game and show their expertise and be part of this movement. So these, keeping the terms in as simple as possible in the framework of mental well-being, physical well-being, social, emotional, and the career and financial, then allowed people to hover over the section to get clarity on what we mean by each section, but then the subsections in there of the insight and what that's brought back to us. And the further extension of it would be, if you have a sports psychologist and you have somebody who's in performance well-being, what's that Venn diagram look like? And then if you overlay safeguarding and some of the other areas within the performance support team or the technical team, what does that look like? Or ClinPsych, how do we connect all of those? So there's something around understanding that kind of framework that's easy, the language is clear, the smaller details, they are easy to access, and with that there's some education and guidelines and templates to say, have you thought about this? Write your own policy or strategy, but here's some support in maybe consolidating your thoughts and having a blueprint for the year, and not just doing like a mindful Monday or a Wonder Drop Wednesday, or something ad hoc that it fits into a reason, a periodization, or a plan, or whatever term they might have, that's connected to the other performance goals.
Right. So it feels more sustainable then, because it's aligned to a strategy and a direction and why you're doing it a little more.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. And there's the last piece of that when I talk about education. It's not always from us in the league or the FA, or it's external stakeholders. Like, people are recommending other people, and people are coming out of the woodwork and they're offering their services. So we're doing work internally and then supporting the clubs to say, do your due diligence on this. Have a look at who these people are. Is a workshop in a typical 60 minutes going to solve what you think the problem is within the club or the need? Or, have you seen the facilitator or the educated tutor share their story before? Are they fit for your environment? Have they got the language right? Is it bespoke for the women's game and not just something that's been copied from the men's? So there is something around that kind of support to them to say, absolutely get who you want in to do some great work, but have a think of some of these kind of factors, because it is that sustainable piece, and you want to look at different stages in the season where you might have different needs, and not just be kind of saying, well, monthly we're going to do X, Y, and Z because it's easier to do that, and we're going to pay this person because they did something in the men's. Well, let's have a chat about the women's game and what our needs are and what the language might be, and how we might want to have smaller groups and shorter sessions or longer sessions. So yeah.
And in the sweet spot where you've got sort of performance well-being, sports psychology, safeguarding, they're working well together, and certainly with your own psychology background, Jen, like, where would you see that working really well? What would be visible in that space?
Yeah, so I think they're deeply complementary. And I think in some spaces where sports psychs have run their own area, their departments, or kind of been left to their own devices, they probably were having a lot of wellbeing conversations and transition conversations and supporting holistically without getting into maybe if you have approaches that are slightly different, like a CBT approach or like an ACT, that in a more structured psychology way, they might not have even got to that stage of operating or needed to, because some of the conversations were more about a balanced well-being. So I think there's something around sports psychology, not just focusing on the mental skills, because it will be dependent on each practitioner on how they approach what they want to do, but there is something connected with the performance on the pitch. And then the needs and the scoping we've done is a lot of practitioners are working on the resilience, the team dynamics, the systemic work of how do I as a sports psych work with the technical team. So the language and the design of the training really kind of enhances focus and gets to a challenge threat point that can bring our cognitive abilities and resilience to a next level for performance. And I think dialing back a little bit, the performance lifestyle and performance well-being, the complement there is it ensures athletes are supported holistically. And they can still address transitions, but it might be a slightly different conversation, or it might segue into a conversation that's impacting performance, or it might just be I'm thinking about the future. Let's have a little bit of a storm on the board and where that might go. It could be life skills, could be personal development. So I think together there can be in a real rich kind of overlapping framework where players are equipped to and empowered to excel. But it doesn't always have to be around just performing on the pitch. So yeah, it's a real interesting space because there's in the women's game that there hasn't been an established kind of mandated role for sports psych and then performance well-being, where there is definitely in a physio and in the doctor and the technical team and the goalkeeping coach and the analyst. So yeah, there's do we need more? Yeah, we absolutely do, because there's more in all the other departments and they're functioning and intertwining really well. So let's get the right people in who have the skill sets and the qualifications in a certain way to work together, but we'll also work independently.
Yeah, and the opportunity to have those conversations as a sort of a psychosocial team to understand that, how we're going to work together collaboratively, what's similar or different about what we do, where we're going to focus on creating that sort of outline of roles and responsibilities and being able to articulate that, I think, to the wider community. Who do I go to for what? I think sometimes this is important too.
Yeah, it is. And there's been many conversations actually over the years, even pre this rule of, does the person need to be on site or off site and kind of be a consultant? And I think to myself, well, would we have consultant head coaches? Would we have consultant physical coaches? And the benefit of the familiarity, the trust, the time it takes to build trust. So yes, people can have rich conversations anonymized off site. And that might be a way for some people, and it could be an option within a picture. But there has to be a unity. There has to be a person who's there, who you're seeing every day, who's seeing the changes in your face and how you walk and the non-verbal, how you interact with others, the canteen interactions, the on and off pitch language. And that noticing as we go back to it builds a profile of that person then and the relationship with you, that if they're offside and you're only using them in an ad hoc kind of reactive way, you're getting a very different version of what these roles could be and this whole department of people could be.
Yeah, certainly in a performance environment, you're not seeing that and you don't know what those performance pressures might be.
No, that's it, exactly. Yeah.
And if you were to look back at this in, say, 2 years' time, and some of these areas have been implemented really well, and you were really proud of what you saw, what would that look like?
Mm-hmm. If I can channel it out to see, feel, hear.
Yeah.
I think hearing people speak, players, staff, that they feel valued, speaking using kind of well-being language and feeling safe and balanced, but also thriving. So not saying that, it's okay that we lost 8 games because I feel great. I feel balanced. Mm-hmm. I feel equipped. I feel like I know myself. I feel like I have the resource. I feel like I can have great conversations and I'm feeling heard. And there's something about this idea of prioritizing well-being and it directly enhancing performance that other people would say, as a team, we're moving in this direction. And we still have the common problems that you'd have in a team and the nature of performance sport. We're not saying that, professional sport would have any kind of change there, but we might see a reduction in stress. We might see an improvement in recovery. We might see positive kind of team cohesion, players who feel that they can perform better and stay healthier for longer and leading to fewer injuries, longer careers. More people wanting to come into the league. Like when I worked at West Ham, we had players who were bringing their teammates and ringing them and saying, we had a great thing. We have something going on here that's really cool. I feel supported and nourished. And that was great. There was still room for improvement, absolutely. But to hear other people say to their friends in different countries, you need to come here. And those players coming and taking a reduction in salary because they wanted to be part of something that felt like they belonged. There was a sense of belonging there, and that they could have a longer career, that they weren't getting to the cusp of 29, 30. And people were saying, well, I think you might be out the door here now. We're seeing players currently play in the league at 36, 35. And there's probably more as the environments grow and nourish, and all this research supports the development of brilliant systems. There is longevity, and maybe we keep those players inside the league. So it might be beyond the pitch, well-being, creating a culture of trust and loyalty. And we hear that in the language of what people speak about in interviews or when they write stuff. So I think there's something about the seeing it in how people interact. And when you go to visit different environments, you get a feeling from what you see that things are good and things are right, and that you can hear it. But essentially, the performances on the pitch will still have their challenges, but there is an improvement, and there might be a reduction in illness and injury over time. It was a really long-winded. It's a really good question that I haven't probably refined over the time, but it's definitely a feel part. I think feeling and seeing and hearing. Yeah,
I love that concept. If you're wanting to see if this is working and working well, what do you see, hear and feel in those environments, in those cultures, and then the impact, I guess, around attraction and attracting the right talent, reducing injury and illness and preventing those things, and then retention, keeping your players for longer, enabling them to feel like they have longevity in their career because of that. That's definitely the performance impact. You can sort of be able to show the world that this is actually performance well-being for those reasons.
Yeah. And like I mentioned, people wanting to come into the league, there isn't, go back to like the legacy piece of it. It isn't about having it for the sake of having it. It's about being world leading in it. It's about saying we really want to invest in the well-being, the whole person. And then other sports saying, oh gosh, like, why are we doing that? Or how can we do that? Like when we did all the work of the female athlete health, that is groundbreaking and world leading. So others have now kind of contacted either ourselves or the Well HQ and that partnership to say, well, what have you done with the football her course? And how did you get female athlete health leads? And what process did you follow? And wow, you're really prioritising that and doing it in a real robust, sustainable way. So I know there's a model there that we've used that will work going forward, but it's that, not having players feeling like they came into a sport that they absolutely loved and left and didn't enjoy the experience. That would just not be cool.
Yeah. Put your hand on your heart and show you've tried to enable people to leave in a better place than they come has always been a mantra for me.
Yeah, wow. Love that.
And then speaking a little bit more, I guess, it's like, how do you gather case studies? I always find that like athletes talking to athletes about some of this, for them, I guess even in West Ham saying, you've got to come here, athletes talking to athletes, that this is a good place to be.
Yeah.
How are you sort of gathering that athlete or player insight?
Yeah, good question. There's a mix. So there are some focus groups that are operating under different headings that we're gathering information. Some a little bit more explicit. So by listening in on the conversations and the needs and the topics of something that has maybe a bigger agenda, you're hearing there's a multitude of research that's happening directly with players, but also through the staff and the club, understanding what their kind of literacy and help seeking behaviours are around well-being, to know what our baseline is. And then the club as a whole, so visits and support systems in place from our team, the smaller league performance and development, or the women's professional leagues team, of what's happening across all disciplines. What are we noticing? Can we grab some great stories and tell some great stories and spread the word? But also the other side, can we understand why some of the problems that might be happening are happening, and take out some of the social media traction that might be just not correct or not supporting it it's not in a helpful way. So I think there's something around all of that gives us that insight from a multitude of different angles. So but I'm hoping also to build on that. So once we got some of the foundational pieces in, to build I've got a kind of world global span academic task force that helps us steer this particular performance wellbeing space. But I'm hoping to get one specifically for the players. But I've got to just be mindful at the moment, and I have been for the last 12 months, of how many asks they have of them. So that's where the listening ear in certain different areas, the captains group, leadership groups within each club, the staff who are having these conversations because they've built trust, and then sharing within communities of practice. So all of that.
And in terms of, appreciating and understanding, looking back in 2 years, you hear those great things that you see, you feel, you hear. There might be some challenges or some barriers along the way to achieve that. What would they potentially be?
I think stigma is one of them. So breaking down kind of outdated beliefs that seeking support is a sign of weakness, or that the player care, because it's been established in the men's game, is the way to go. Because we hear a lot like, it's happened in the men's game, it's this way in the men's game. So yes, there's a whole host of incredible women here who have different needs, and the game has got different needs. So we've got to listen and we've got to support. So the stigma of anything around well-being or mental health just needs a bit of support and education. And there's some great work that's been done that it shows in the research I've gathered that people are more comfortable to talk, and we've put some structures for clinical and subclinical support for the staff and players to be able to access that. But there is something around the if I show some weakness, if I say I need support, if we have if we're focusing on well-being, are we not focusing on performance? The other area would be the buy-in. So we talked earlier about leadership. So ensuring leadership prioritises well-being in themselves, in their senior management, in the investment across all levels of the organisation, and then with the players and staff on the ground, living and breathing it. And I think investment and kind of buy-in comes from all different angles. So it's been a challenge. It's less of a challenge because more clubs are understanding it, able to talk internally, influence, and then go, yes, now's the right time. There is gaps in the funding and the resource that different clubs have. So we'll have some people who have no resource in this area, some clubs who have, and we're trying to upskill and support the needs and the wants, and then the capacity of the individuals. And then there are other clubs saying, we want this, how do we do it? We need some guidance, and that's in place. So it's also making them going back to the C feel here, it's also making them feel heard. So don't just come in and say, you need to do this, and it has to be this way and this way only. We're saying, this is a really, we advise strongly, and then hopefully in the future we can guide you to say it's a must. And we'll hold your hand through this. And even though you are under-resourced, maybe this and this could join together, or here's a guidance document, or here's some education for free so you can get up to speed. The last part I think we mentioned before is sustainability. It's just the whole embedding well-being as a long-term cultural value and not just a trend. It has to appear in the strategy. It has to be living and breathing off a page. But it, the scaffold that we provide as a league can do that. And they don't feel on their own doing that, and they don't feel lost, and it's not this, stigmatized thing over here. So yeah, there's something like that, but that requires patience, which, we have. And then I'm into the education, the scaffolding, the paralleling, the commitment to kind of demonstrating that, like, the tangible value of well-being. And that's the performance well-being link. A lot of people are investing a lot of money into players and facilities, and they want to see that that's equally signed points on the board or output. So, encouraging them to see beyond one measure of success, and understanding what's important to them as a club is super important to us.
Yeah, I like that, kind of guiding and supporting them through this with structures and frameworks, but it's got to buy in, it's got to work for them, it's got to be integral to their culture, and it's got to make sure that it speaks to their needs as a club and their performance outcomes as well. There's a lot to consider in all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And if someone was in your shoes starting out thinking, right, I really want to do this performance well-being within an organisation, a business, a club, and you said to them, right, here's some 3 top tips that to get you started and take in the right direction with this, what would those 3 things be?
I think the first one would start by listening. So understand the specific needs of the players, the staff, the environment before looking at the solutions. Once you know what the needs are, and then that could come from information that we share across, the 23 clubs or global research. But that's what I did. I did a kind of listening tour for the first 3 months. What do I know exists? What are the needs? My lens is this. What's my kind of blind spots or biases here? What's important that I hear out here, in the men's game, in the WNBA, in Australia, New Zealand, in corporate world, in different industries. So I've done all that work that I can share with them, but they've got to listen to their environment and say, right, we're going to go performance wellbeing. What's their specific needs? And then who is that person that is going to fit one of these areas of this framework? And then what other support might they need then to top that up? So the integration into the integration of wellbeing to performance, I think, is so vital as a second step. So you've done your listening and your needs analysis, then you integrate the wellbeing into performance, show how prioritizing wellbeing enhances results or kind of alleviates some other issues or illnesses. And that can come from just listening to people interact and how they're speaking about things and how the buy-in is for attendance on certain things. So, if you have another person in a multidisciplinary meeting chatting about something different or something that maybe previously the physio was having to take on board, or the sports therapist, or the physical performance coach. So I think the integration of wellbeing and performance is a vital next step, and understanding how that works. The last part I think is so important here, and it's hard to keep it to 3, but I think it's trust. So if somebody was, doing this in a club and had a performance wellbeing lead, they've done their needs analysis, they've recruited the person who is the right fit for that environment, the right energy, the right level of professionalism, the right level of maturity that knows how to be a professional in a professional environment, not friends with players, not in there for the badge, like for the right reasons, and has the education behind them to fit one of the components of the module or oversee all of them, and then resource and signpost really well. You've got to build trust, create the safe spaces for honest conversations, demonstrate the commitment through actions. I think that's the key part, and that is the consistency that leads to the sustainability. And for me, that was the constant. If I can be the person that somebody trusts over a period of time, we can have all sorts of conversations and we can solve all sorts of problems, and we can, have really great, momentous kind of progression, but really valuable experiences underpinned by care and connectivity.
Environments, and lots of good purpose behind it.
Yeah, for sure.
And then knowing that you've written a great book, Jen, Myths of Sports Performance, and you touch on some of these areas, what kind of comes alive within that book that can help people connect to some of this performance wellbeing work?
Yeah, great question. So we started with the Myths of Sports Coaching book a few years ago, and that came from a place where I was having conversations on the ground with coaches, and they were just not knowing where to source their information. They were hearing, are learning styles a thing? Are they not? I heard this, it's on our curriculum. And there's a bit of ambiguity, but also isolation, because coaching can be quite lonely. So that book had 20 chapters specifically kind of for sports coaches, students, to dive into. But when we ran a series of webinars, people said, you missed out leadership. You missed out this. What about menstrual cycle? What about female athletes being parents? And what about leadership? What about what else is in there? There's one on coach development and needing support and mentoring or not. So there's a whole host of stuff that people were offering, and we thought, well, there's a second book. So Dr. Amy Whitehead and myself co-edited the second book. The second book has I think it's 40. I need to double check the number, but the first book had 32 contributors, and then we topped that with 40. Global reach, gender balance, diversify as much as we can so people get this perspective. But linking back to this, it's I suppose the book the link I think, which is really a special link, is that we've got some outdated beliefs about things. We've got to, like sacrificing well-being for results. And that if you focus on one, it hinders the other. So the book has all of these chapters under the kind of myths of sports performance that says, here's a topic that you may have a thought about. Here's some research in a real accessible way. And let's find the balance. So the book kind of advocates for a balanced, evidence-based approach where performance and well-being complement each other under different headings. So I think this message aligns perfectly with the ethos of performance well-being. Supporting the individuals holistically leads to sustainable long-term success.
Breaking down those myths, busting them, and showing the impact of actually what the opposite may do if you bust those myths.
That's exactly it, yeah.
And from that research, is there one, I certainly saw people who've listened perhaps some of the other podcasts saying, where's that data? Where is that research? What one bit of key research has kind of influenced you most doing that and developing that book and pulling it together?
Oh gosh, what a great question. It'd be hard to pinpoint one. I think there's a lot. There's some key research around mental health, high performance, well-being that has drawn me in to say, God, I've got great leverage here, or whoa, what an awareness, I didn't realize this. Or like more recently, Carly Perry is just finished her PhD actually last summer, and she looked specifically at women's professional football and the needs and all around well-being and mental health. So there's kind of more localized, detailed research that I've really connected with, and then more global stuff like his name escapes me now, but it's a piece of research done in Cambridge University, by this guy who looked at the impact of having like kind of one-hit wonder ad hoc well-being things, which I'm hearing across clubs. People think if I just put something in on a Friday or a Monday, I'm doing the well-being thing, I'm ticking it off. And basically the research across like, a massive sample size said they're not working. They're not showing. We did a control group and we monitored this and looked at that. And actually, if you don't have a plan and there's no consistency and people don't see it happening with kind of authenticity, then this once off yoga on a Monday morning at 8 o'clock is not going to work. So that there's a couple of key people. There's a couple of key people, a couple of key pieces of research. Another one recently, which was really interesting, is the summary of it was that the well-being industry is more lucrative than the sports industry. And I think when I think about all of the different strands of well-being, I think, of course, well, there's tourism and there's food and culinary experiences and all of that beyond the space that we're operating in. But we think of the $1 billion industry sport is, and then the money that well-being is, like, because it isn't prevalent in a lot of the sports organizations as a pillar, it might be forgotten, or might think, oh, this well-being thing on the periphery. And you're like, no, actually, this is a massive, massive industry that outside this bubble of sport is very, very, very pressing, But just thinking of some of the chapters here that link to kind of some of the research and experience. There's some stuff like psychological safety that we talked about, where we have 5 different authors talking about seeking clarity on psychological safety, tackling myths and misconceptions in competitive sport. And you've got people like Michael Cook and Mustafa Sakar and Ian Sharp in there talking about that. And then you've got menstrual cycle myths. Jackie Forsyth has done an incredible chapter, thinking using electronics and sleep, and we've got 3 incredible researchers talking about sleep there and underpinning that. So, all of the ones that we that link to some of the components of well-being, all feedback is beneficial. Myths of periodization, the myth of being a good mother and elite athlete are not compatible. So I won't go into all of them, but there's some amazing researchers who've said, listen, I'm really passionate about this area. I'm going to co-author a chapter. And then all of a sudden, Amy and I have this incredible book that I don't mind saying it's incredible because they've done all the writing and we've just edited it down and positioned them. And, so I think it does feed into this balance of performance and well-being, and that kind of, that how they complement each other.
Yeah. If you can always make the message for why bother, and having that evidence that you've gathered through the research you've done and the people you've spoken to, definitely worth exploring that book to see how you can help sort of show impact and show the reason why you need to do this in whatever culture or whatever environment you're trying to perform in.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Dawn. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, your insight, your openness, sharing your own experiences of this journey as the game grows and develops exponentially over the last few years, and hopefully more to come. So let's hope performance wellbeing is an integral part of that journey for staff and for the players, and we can see the performance outcomes at the end of it all. Thanks, Jim.